We are, as we speak, in a horrendous geopolitical contest with the Chinese for the same energy sources. They are everywhere in the world, and they are far more aggressive than the United States. The trillion-dollar question is, in fact, is there enough energy to supply the Chinese needs?
Oil is the most important source of energy in the world today. It provides about 40% of the world's energy supply, far more than any other source. Control over the flow of oil translates into immense political power and political influence. And it has been the policy of the United States since World War II that it be the United States and no other country that controls this vital source of world power.
The stakes are high. Iraq is already a rich and powerful country that possesses the world's second largest reserves of oil and over 1 million men under arms. Our country now imports nearly half the oil it consumes and could face a major threat to its economic independence. Much of the world is even more dependent upon imported oil and is even more vulnerable to Iraqi threats.
I don't think anybody except think tank types and ideologues believe that we're in the Middle East for democracy. The U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, which is our most important relationship in the Middle East, goes from the White House to a royal palace, which is inhabited by monarchs of the 14th century variety, like the kings that we fought a war against in 1776.
The Shah of Iran was our ally, Saddam Hussein was our ally, the government of Pakistan today is our ally, the government of Saudi Arabia today is our ally. These are all countries that have very poor human rights records and that are essentially run by different forms of authoritarian rule. They have existed largely in a deal, particularly with the Saudis, that they would become our partner in the stabilization of the oil world in return for us guaranteeing their security, both externally but also as a government.
Let me be clear, the sovereign independence of Saudi Arabia is of vital interest to the United States.
Look at this from the perspective of Saudi Arabians. They see Americans protecting the royal family against resistance. The Saudi Arabian National Guard, whose function is to protect the royal family and silence dissent, always has been armed by the United States. As far as they're concerned, we're totally complicit with the repression, the lack of freedom, the lack of democracy in their country. We are part and parcel of the Saudi dictatorship. I think almost every American, when you push them on that, will nod that that's exactly the case, so that we're not there for democracy.
I think the Iraq War was about oil, absolutely. One of the members of the British cabinet said at one point, "Do you think we would invade if they exported carrots?"
I believe most Americans understand that our dependence on petroleum is a source of vulnerability for this country. It invites attack, it invites terrorism, it's a threat to our well-being.
To meet our growing demand for gasoline, America now imports about 1 million barrels of refined gasoline every day.
He understands he has to offer Americans some sign, some evidence that he's aware of this concern and is doing something about it. Well, the thing that he has offered is drilling in Anwar.
To make America less dependent, Congress needs to pass a pro-growth, pro-jobs, pro-environment development of Anwar. It makes sense.
Well, it's an outright lie. Using the Department of Energy statistics, we have to import so much more oil each year, and Anwar has so little that each year, despite Anwar, we'll still be increasing our dependence on foreign oil.
Our long-term outlook has an increase in oil demand in this country over the next 20 years of about 8 million barrels a day. Almost all of that oil will have to be imported.
We use more than 20 million barrels of oil a day in the United States. By 2025, we will increase our daily consumption by 8 million barrels, according to the Department of Energy. 90% of that increase will need to be imported, despite drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
If you look at the Department of Energy's figures on where that oil is going to come from, more and more of it is going to come from unstable, divided, fractious, terrorist-ridden areas of the world. The Persian Gulf, West Africa and North Africa, the Andean region of Latin America, and Central Asia. The more we go into those areas, the more resistance we're going to face and the more risk that American troops will have to be sent over there to protect the flow of oil, to protect the refineries, the pipelines, and the sea routes that carry the oil. And that's exactly what's happening under the Bush administration. We are turning the military into a global military protection service, and more of our troops are in very risky places, putting their life on the line to protect the flow of oil to fill up American cars. And inevitably there will be a loss of life, and the more dependent we become on this foreign oil, the greater the price in blood that we're going to have to pay to keep maintaining our existing oil dependency.
In pursuit of extracting oil as cheaply as possible for consumption largely by Western nations, oil development has devastated environments in many locations around the globe. Ecuador is one example. In 1964, Texaco began drilling for oil in the northern region of the Ecuadorian Amazon. During the period from 1964 to 1992, Texaco extracted more than 1 billion gallons of oil from what was, prior to the oil exploration, a pristine rainforest.
Texaco's going into Ecuador is a classic example of a giant, powerful oil company entering an environment in a country where the government had no idea how to regulate and what to do. When Texaco entered Ecuador in the mid-1960s, Ecuador had never drilled for oil. Texaco was the first company to come in and develop oil drilling infrastructure. Their executives made what turned out to be a very fateful decision. They decided to use practices that they were not using in the United States that were substandard compared to what was being used industry-wide at that time around the world. One is they decided to dump toxic water formation directly into the rainforest environment instead of re-injecting it thousands of feet underground like they were doing at that point in other countries. When crude oil is taken out of the ground, it has two parts. One is the marketable crude that goes to the refinery and onto the commercial market. The other is waste product. It's toxic water that contains 2% crude and some of the most harmful carcinogens known to man. Of the 18 billion gallons of toxic wastewater dumped, if you just take the 2% of toxic wastewater that's pure crude, you have an amount of crude dumped that's 30 times larger than the Exxon Valdez spill. If you also include the other 98% of the wastewater, which contains carcinogens, you have an oil disaster the likes of which this world has never seen before. And what's so disturbing about what happened in Ecuador is that this was done deliberately to save money.
El pueblo achuar está muy preocupado por todos esos daños causados por la Texaco y por otras empresas petroleras. Porque esos daños que han causado es un daño irreparable y no tiene cómo volver a dejar como antes. Con todos esos daños han quedado para los pueblos indígenas.
You know, you can see literally hundreds of open-air toxic waste pits filled with like this oil sludge that dot the landscape, and these leach into the groundwater. And the groundwater is the source of drinking water for the region. There are thousands of people right now who, because of what Texaco did in Ecuador, are living in a cancer zone where every day they are forced to drink contaminated water just to survive. Thousands of people are being exposed daily to carcinogens. Thousands of people are at risk of contracting cancer. Many of them already have cancer, many of them have passed away. And if this is not cleaned up soon, I believe, as do many medical observers, that in the next decade, we will see countless numbers of innocent people perish, including children.
Oil extraction has not only caused environmental damage, it has generated increased poverty in already impoverished nations. And it has triggered human rights abuse. Ruthless dictatorships are sometimes a partner in the extraction of oil. Nigeria is but one example.
Those countries that have oil or other forms of minerals actually do worse in their development than those countries that don't have oil and don't have minerals. They have higher rates of malnutrition than many of the non-oil countries. They often have very surprising rates of infant mortality. They often have extreme levels of poverty. So a country like Nigeria, which has been living off of oil since the 1960s, has an overwhelming percent of its population living on less than $1 a day.
Within the period Nigeria was producing more oil, statistics show you that about 70% of the people, even today, live below the poverty line. 70% of the people. And we're talking of a population of over 100 million. So poverty level has actually increased with years of oil production instead of going down.
You visually look at the Niger Delta and you see the fishing areas have been destroyed, the land has been destroyed, there's oil seepage everywhere, there's pollution everywhere, you can't drink the water. The ways people used to live have changed. And it's a very dramatic, visually dramatic result that you can see after 30 years of oil exploration, or even more actually in that area.
In response to the human suffering resulting from the pollution in the Niger Delta, Ken Saro-Wiwa, a local poet, writer, and businessman, organized the Ogoni people living in the Niger Delta region to seek justice from the oil companies and the government that allowed the environmental devastation to take place.
The Ogoni are a fishing and farming people. They have lived in a very fertile area that produced most of the food that was eaten in the Delta proper. Shell found oil in the Ogoni area in 1958. Since then, they found about 6 oil fields in an area that has the highest population density in Africa, which is about 1,500 people per square mile.
Ken was extremely effective in organizing against Shell's activities in Ogoni land. He founded the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people, MOSOP. And MOSOP really was a very effective organizing group at a time when this was pretty much unheard of in the Niger Delta region. This made Shell, which was the dominant oil producer in the Niger Delta, very upset. As far as we know, Shell started lobbying the Nigerian government to do something about this activist group that was beginning to really put pressure on the oil companies to do things differently and draw attention, even internationally, to the environmental damage.
I do not want any blood spilt, not of an Ogoni man, not of any strangers amongst us. We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
A memorandum was written in May of 1994, apparently sent from the internal security forces in the Ogoni region to the Nigerian military. The memo stated, "Shell operations still impossible unless ruthless military operations are undertaken for smooth economic activities to commence." Mossop's efforts to protect the environment and human rights were evidently an obstacle to Shell's oil extraction operations in Ogoniland. In the ensuing months after this memo was written, several Ogoni villages were attacked, killing villagers and destroying homes.
I think it was a military punishment for the Ogoni people to teach them a lesson, I presume.
Ken and several others were arrested and then tried in what I think is internationally recognized to have been a kangaroo court.
Together with a number of other minority rights activists, he was executed by the military regime. Shell Corporation was there during the trial. People protested all over the world, begging Shell to stop the execution.
I think that if she had really made more effort to intervene on behalf of Ken Saro-Wiwa, he would have still been alive today.
Ogoni Day in 1993 was the most exhilarating experience for me. It was wonderful to see a people who had been docile for so long. It was good to see fear no longer a part of them. And on that day, when I saw the large number of people streaming into Bori from their various villages, I really felt a sense of fulfillment. If I had died the day after that, I would have died a very happy man indeed.
People in this country depend on oil. We should understand where it comes from and the price that's paid.
I truly believe that a lot of the things that go on in the third world that American companies do or the American government does would not happen if the American people were properly informed by the media of the overall consequences of these policies. The media is the link that allows people to be informed, to make intelligent decisions about how to live their lives. And when you lack that information, it's very hard to take action.
TV has gone from being TV to crack TV, or to free-based TV. You know, it's so much more intense with news going, you know, and the things along the bottom, you know, and it's like just, you know, it's super intense right now.
They were on a voyage. Family safety and security.
The blockbuster legal charge. And can your